welcome to our training today for CARE Act implementation. This training will focus on talking through housing, services, and supports that are available through the CARE Act for CARE participants. This training is primarily for volunteer supporters to help them better understand the process and what is available to CARE participants. Let's take a look at what we'll be covering in today's training. The first section will be focusing on housing and supports and touch upon the volunteer supporters role and what that can look like. The second section will focus on housing and supports that may be included in the CARE process, go over housing first approach, and take a look at how the elements of the CARE agreement and CARE plan specific to housing and community supports and how that can be individualized for CARE participants. Some learning objectives today. The goal of this training is that by the end of the session, you will have an increased ability to describe the supporter's role with regards to these services and supports, list the types of housing within the continuum for CARE participants, and then identify housing, services, and supports that may be included in a CARE agreement or CARE plan. This training is in coordination with several other trainings, one that goes into more detail about what those paths to services are and explains what a CARE agreement and a CARE plan is, along with voluntary engagement. So if you'd like more information, we share at the end of this presentation links to several trainings that will be helpful for you. So I just wanted to introduce today's speakers. Today I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Rachel Johnson-Yates and Anthony Federico, and they have a lot of experience in this area and are really passionate about community supports and housing. Rachel Johnson-Yates is a licensed mental health and addiction counselor, and she has dedicated her career to increasing access to care through approaching her work through an equity-focused and trauma-informed framework. And Anthony has served in leadership roles with California local government agencies and community-based organizations to implement and analyze housing, homelessness, and healthcare programs. So we're really pleased to be joined by them today, and I'm going to turn the time over to Rachel to talk through some of the role of the volunteer supporter in supports and services. Rachel?
Thanks, Patricia. So today we are going to start with a brief overview of the role of the volunteer supporter as it relates to housing and supports in the CARE Act. We're also going to bring back a case example, Maria, to help us understand and illustrate the housing and supports that are available through the CARE process. In the training on CARE housing and supports, we used a case example named Maria to help illustrate needs that individuals might have around housing and supports as they navigate the CARE process. Throughout our session today, we're going to continue to reference Maria's case as we talk about different services and supports that she might want to be connected to as she engages in the CARE process and starts working toward further goal achievement and stabilization. So let's think about the details of Maria's situation. Maria is 50 years old. She has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and that diagnosis took place for the first time at the age of 24. She has a history of using substances, and her substances of choice are heroin and other opiates. And since her diagnosis, she has been intermittently engaged with mental health, substance use disorder services, however, has not really been getting any services for the last 4 years. On the medical side, she has unmanaged diabetes that has really been causing her a lot of physical concern and typically uses the emergency room for her care. Her family was who petitioned her to participate in the CARE Act, and she has been determined to be eligible and has chosen her cousin Claire to be her supporter. So as we think about her current situation, her parents are a primary support, but they are not able to house her. And so she has often been living in abandoned buildings around the city and periodically has stays in shelters. And she's told shelter staff that if she were to participate in any sort of housing program, she really would want her own room and apartment. And so as we think of Maria, there's a lot happening here, and Maria is really going to need a lot of support to help navigate her mental health needs, her substance use needs, as well as her medical health needs. As we know, all of these are very much interconnected. And in order to really effectively manage all of these concerns, we know that an individual needs to be able to be stably housed in order to have these needs met and to be able to navigate through the system in a way that the various interventions are proving to be effective. So the care process might feel complex. It involves a lot of individuals who contribute to and participate in the process, but it's important that we remember that all of the engagement around the care process is with the intention to support access to treatment, housing, and supports for the care participant. The volunteer supporter is an adult that is chosen by the care participant to provide support through the care process and to promote the individual's preferences, choices, and autonomy. The supporter is in place to really help the individual understand the process and the purpose of each step in the care process, to connect with the care team that might include their counselor or attorney, the behavioral health team, and other supports, and to really support the participant in being better able to voice their needs and preferences with regards to treatment and housing and other supportive needs. And so as you're thinking about the care process, it's important to remember that somebody that has a mental health diagnosis such as schizophrenia may find themselves feeling particularly overwhelmed by the number of things going on, the number of decisions that they are being asked to be made, the care process in and of itself. And so that's why that role of the volunteer supporter is really, really critical. The volunteer supporter is really there to be as is in the title, support, to help the participant vocalize their own preferences, and to also help them navigate and think through all of the decisions that they need to make in order to ensure that the recovery pathway that is chosen for the care participant really is the pathway that will be the most likely to be effective for that individual. So we have talked a little bit about the supporter's roles and responsibilities in the care process in prior trainings. In this training, we're thinking about the supporter's role in relation to Maria's housing and other community support needs. So as Maria's supporter, Claire might want to start considering and discussing the following. So first, it would be helpful to know about Maria's history with housing and other supportive services. So as an example, Maria has talked about wanting her own space. Claire might ask Maria more about that. Has Maria had her own room in the past, or her own apartment? How did it go when she had her own room in the past, or her own apartment? What sorts of things were working well for her? What sorts of issues may have been concerns? What sorts of services has Maria talked about that are priorities for her right now? These may be things like food, housing, clothing, transportation, employment. So what other sorts of things does Maria need to be able to work toward that goal of independent housing and make sure that she is able to maintain that housing situation? Claire can work to help Maria understand the potential benefits of engaging in the care process, including the potential prioritization that may occur for housing and community support services. And Claire can use the approach called supported decision-making, which we have discussed in other trainings, to help Maria in voicing her own preferences for housing and support services. And for those of you that are logging in, and this might be your only first or second training, we have far more information about the supporter role in some trainings that we have. We have a volunteer supporter toolkit. We have some information about the supporter role in the CARE Act that is both a kind of brief overview as well as a full training. So please feel free to log into those trainings as well if you want to do a deeper dive. And so for now, let's pause and kind of think about Claire's role in supporting Maria accessing housing and different sorts of supports. And to do that, I would love to call on my colleague Anthony and just talk about this a little more. So Anthony, if you don't mind chiming in, when we are thinking about how Claire might be able to support Maria in connecting her to different services and supports, what could Claire do to really help make sure that she's getting the most out of her role as a volunteer supporter, and that Maria is getting the support that we hope that she can benefit from in this process?
So if you're Claire and you're there in the role as the volunteer supporter, it could be helpful to approach Maria using trauma-informed principles of empathy, transparency, and collaboration. And then also learn about Maria's past encounters with housing and services. What worked? What did not work? What made her feel safe and comfortable? What did not? Can you use supported decision-making to better understand and increase Maria's ability to communicate her needs and preferences to other providers that she's engaged with and members of the care team?
Thank you. Oh, good.
I think the big takeaway is it's really up to Maria how Claire is going to be involved.
Yes, thank you so much, Anthony. And I think that last point is incredibly important, is that ultimately Maria is the decision maker in terms of how Claire will be involved, how the role of the supporter will play out in her individual care process, and that relationship and that collaboration is really important to make sure that Maria stays the focus in terms of her preferences and desires as the care process unfolds. So with that, Anthony, I will kick it back over to you.
Great. So now we're going to continue our training by reviewing the types of housing and community supports and services that may be available to CARE Act participants. So first, we'll look at the housing continuum, including different housing program types and other types of supportive services that could be available through the care process. At the end of the training, we will return to Maria and talk about her preferences. And once again, we'll talk about how Claire, her volunteer supporter, can leverage her role to support Maria in voicing her preferences with regards to housing and other resources. Great, so we're starting with an overview of an evidence-based housing approach that's found to be effective for individuals who historically may have had difficulty accessing housing programs on account of their mental health, substance use, or other social and economic factors. And this model is called the Housing First model. Housing First is an approach that recognizes housing as a basic human right, and it asserts that people can better utilize services, maintain employment, and achieve other goals in life, continue on the path of recovery, etc., once they have stable housing. So this approach eliminates housing preconditions and requirements such as sobriety or program completion. Let's look for a second at the evidence basis for this approach. A study of 2,000 participants found that Housing First rapidly resolves homelessness and leads to sustained periods of housing. So 62% of people in the study maintained housing at 2 years versus 31% who were housed in programs that had treatment requirements. Housing First is also a very good investment. If you imagine, so every $10 invested in Housing First programs yields something like $21 or $22 in savings in reduced utilization of other emergency services. And there's also an improved quality of life. Housing First improves community functioning and well-being. Next slide, please. So to look a little more in depth at the Housing First approach, here are some tenets or principles. Housing First typically adheres to a harm reduction philosophy, meaning the strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with substance use. Housing First does not impose requirements for sobriety or treatment on participation, and participants cannot be evicted for substance use unrelated to lease violations. Participants, or let's call them tenants, are not rejected for poor credit or financial history, poor or lack of rental history, or criminal convictions that are unrelated to tenancy. Housing First programs accept referrals directly from crisis response systems and emphasize engagement and problem solving over therapeutic goals or service plans. Tenants have a lease, which is very important, and the rights and responsibilities of tenancy. And Housing First programs prioritize eligible tenants based on a system that is not simply first come, first serve. Housing First programs often include special design features or other features to accommodate disabilities, reduce harm, and promote health, community, and independence for the tenants that Housing First programs serve. Next slide, please. So we're gonna consider what housing might meet Maria's needs as we go through the next few slides. And we're going to look at this range of housing options that adhere to a housing first philosophy. First, we're going to look at bridge or interim housing programs, then rapid rehousing, and then permanent supportive housing programs. So we just discussed the housing first approach or philosophy. It appears in all of these different housing program models, and let's take a look at each one. In bridge housing, the aim is to rapidly transition individuals from being unsheltered to being indoors in a stable interim housing environment that can ultimately bridge a participant to a permanent housing solution. So in terms of populations of focus, this program category can serve anyone who's experiencing homelessness. And it typically prioritizes people who are very close to a housing move-in. It could be that they have been enrolled in or matched to a permanent supportive housing program, but they're waiting for their unit to become available or repainted and turned around or something like that. It can also be, bridge housing programs can also be used for highly vulnerable individuals who will become prioritized for PSH when such opportunities become available. The outcomes of bridge housing programs are clear. They reduce the number of people with chronic conditions who are unsheltered and can reduce the reliance of folks on emergency department utilization or other utilization of urgent and emergent care. And bridge housing improves client stability, safety, and health and well-being. Next slide, please. So shelter and interim housing programs are separate but related and encompass a whole range of housing and shelter program types, which are all noted here: tiny homes, emergency shelter, motel vouchers, navigation centers, peer respite. These are all the sorts of programs that can fall under the umbrella of this shelter and interim housing category. Crisis housing, transitional housing, recovery housing, recuperative care, and community reentry and diversion housing programs also could be classified as shelter or interim housing programs. So moving on to rapid rehousing, which is a distinctive housing program model. Rapid rehousing is a housing intervention that can range from short or medium term to slightly longer term. And the goal is, once again, transitioning participants to a permanent housing destination. So to explain the intervention, rapid rehousing typically takes individuals or families who are unhoused and rapidly moves them into permanent housing without preconditions such as employment, income, abstinence, etc. And the intervention consists of time-limited rental assistance, as well as different sorts of supportive services that can meet the needs of particular participants. That can be case management or housing location, housing move-in assistance, or employment development. Can all be the supportive service components of a rapid rehousing model. And rapid rehousing is intended to be low barrier. Once again, tenants have a lease and have the same general tenancy rights as any other renter. Rapid rehousing programs can serve families and individuals in need of medium or longer term support to carry them over to a permanent housing destination. And once again, the outcomes include that Rapid rehousing, no surprise, helps improve housing stability and prevents returns to homelessness, and achieves those housing outcomes that we want to see in this whole range of housing first program types. Next slide, please. Permanent supportive housing is the third housing first program type that we're going to focus on in this training, and it links subsidized housing units with flexible voluntary supportive services, which once again can include the whole range of case management, which can be focused on mental health, substance use disorder, independent living skills, vocational or employment development, peer support, or whatever it is that program focuses on and whatever it is the program participant needs. It should be low barrier, and participants once again have a lease and are entitled to the same rights that lease provides to any other renter. Housing first programs can be provided in a site-based model, which is to say all in one building under one roof, or in a scattered site model, which means the units can be distributed across properties and not all located in one building or program location. The population focus is typically people who are experiencing chronic homelessness, which means generally either one sustained period of homelessness of a year or more, or numerous episodes of homelessness over a more extended period. And once again, research has demonstrated very positive outcomes associated with clients in supportive housing programs. More than 83% stay housed at the 1-year mark, and emergency department visits decline by 57%. Emergency detox declines by 87%, and incarceration declines by 52%. Let's also touch briefly on housing vouchers. Housing voucher programs are well known. Many, but not all, fit under this permanent supportive housing program type, but they're very important to know about for the volunteer supporter and for the CARE Act participant. So in voucher-based housing models, a client does not move into a specific unit as a specific address. Their rental assistance and supportive services, case management, or the other types mentioned above, will follow them to wherever they find a rental housing opportunity in the traditional rental market. And often they will find that housing with the assistance of a housing location provider or a housing navigator or similar support to locate and secure that housing and get moved in. Vouchers target different populations and are funded and provided through different agencies. A couple of examples include the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, very well known, very visible. Also, mainstream vouchers and emergency housing vouchers. All of those voucher programs are typically administered by a local housing authority. There's also the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing voucher, better known as VASH, and administered by the VA. So those are the different housing program types on the Housing First continuum that we're going to look at in this training. And those resources are, of course, subject to availability in the particular county of the CARE Act participant. I'm Maria in this case. But remember that a judge can order prioritization of any appropriate services, which includes housing. So in addition to housing resources, behavioral health services, and medications that get included in the care plan, the care plan will also include community supports and social services, which we're going to take a moment to look at now. So the CARE Act also specifies social services and supports that can be included in the care plan. And these include social services like income supports like SSI and CalWORKS, which can provide cash aid for housing, food, clothing, and medical expenses, but also the California Food Assistance Program, CalFresh, and WIC, and home care services like IHSS, the In-Home Supportive Services Program. So the care participant is not limited to these care agreement or plan services that are highlighted in statute. There may be other services or resources that meet a care participant's needs, like employment supports, transportation, educational needs, and other basic needs. Again, like housing, the availability of these services and support will likely differ by county. And again, remember, it's not the volunteer supporter's role to track down all of the right services for the participant, but it is helpful for the volunteer supporter to have an awareness of the different housing programs and other supports so that you can engage with the participant and then engage with the case manager and other members of the care team when representing the participant's needs and preferences. Great. So now that we've discussed the types of housing and community services and supports that can be included in a care plan or agreement, let's come back to Maria and consider how the volunteer supporter might assist Maria in individualizing her agreement or plan. We want to think about how the support in Maria's care plan or agreement can adequately reflect her priorities, needs, or preferences. So let's consider Maria's unique needs, which would end up impacting the housing and supports that get included in the agreement or plan. So we'll remember from the beginning of the training that Maria has informed her case manager and her supporter that she prefers housing that offers a private room and is uncomfortable with roommates because of past challenges sharing space and past experiences losing housing related to her illness and periodic verbal outbursts. Other than that, she's open to both transitional and permanent housing options, including site-based or voucher-based housing programs, and would benefit from the case manager's assistance in locating one of these housing opportunities. She's also asked for nutrition assistance, specifically CalFresh, formerly known as, and sometimes better known as, food stamps. And so although it's not required to be in a care agreement or plan, Maria has other specific requests, and those include clothing and transportation assistance. Okay, so in a second, we'll return to the scenario of Maria and Claire, but first, throughout this training, we have reviewed several housing resources on the Housing First continuum that may be accessed by the care participant. We've briefly covered the types of services and supports that may be on a care plan or agreement, and those other services that may not be on a care plan or agreement, but would still benefit the Care Act participant. And then we reviewed how a supporter can support the care participant in communicating her preferences. So Rachel, I want to ask how you, in the role of Claire, Maria's volunteer supporter, how you might assist Maria in relaying her housing and supportive services preferences to her care team.
Thanks, Anthony. So as I'm thinking about if I were in the role of the volunteer supporter, how I would be able to best help Maria, first, it would be important for me to kind of have a general understanding of what sorts of supports and housing options there are that are out there. And then I would be working with Maria to help her understand her own preferences, make sure she's had a chance to talk those through, think through the different options, and then really help her figure out the way that she would voice her own preferences to the care team members, like her attorney, her care manager, housing navigator, if that person's in place yet, and any other team members that might be important to have that conversation with. I would also be working with Maria to make sure that the care team really understands not only her housing needs, but any other sorts of needs that she might have. So it might be a CalFresh request. It might be some needs with transportation. Perhaps she has some needs around clothing or employment, and any number of other things that might be going on that ultimately would serve as a barrier to her maintaining her housing. And so really important to help Maria voice her own needs and opinions, but then also, in partnership with Maria, making sure that those needs are heard. And then I would be working with Maria to help her have open communication with the care team members like her attorney, the full treatment team, the housing and community supports providers that might be present. And so really working with her to help her figure out how she might approach different topics, encouraging her to make sure that she is advocating for herself, and talking through the options that are her preferences, that she's able to hear suggestions that the treatment team or the care team might have, and that I'm working with her so that to make sure that she fully understands those needs, and that she is ultimately landing in partnership with the care team on the options that are going to be the best fit for her.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate you lifting up that last part about the importance of the volunteer supporter in helping support and empower the CARE Act participant in voicing and amplifying their own needs to other members of the care team or attorney or other supports that might be in the mix. And with that, I will turn it over to Patricia to explain further resources and wrap up our training.
Thank you, Anthony and Rachel. Please, if you have any additional questions, we'll go over some resources for you and how to reach out. The goal is that by the end of this training, you as the participant will have an increased ability to describe the supporter's role with regards to housing and community supports and better understand the options. So like Rachel and Anthony said, you can help the care participant navigate and make decisions and have their preferences and choices heard and reflected in the care plan and agreement. Like Anthony just mentioned, I do want to go over a few additional resources for you. So we have the Volunteer Supporter Toolkit, and that is available on the CARE Act Resource Center. And this really walks through the supporter role, helps better understand the care process, and includes a worksheet that might be helpful for you as a volunteer supporter as you're supporting somebody through this process. We do have a number of trainings available specifically designed for supporters. So we have an overview of the care process, an overview of the care plan and agreement, also supported decision-making, trauma-informed care, elimination of bias, psychiatric advanced directives, and a deeper dive on the responsibilities of the volunteer supporter. So these resources are available for you, but I want to stress that there's no wrong door. If you need more information about about the role or about the care process, please reach out at our email address, info@careact.org, and we can connect you with somebody who can answer your questions or connect you with the answers. We appreciate your time, and check out our resources.